Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I would just like to take a moment to thank all of my colleagues in this House for this last 4 years and a bit. This has been a great session of Parliament. I know a number of people have made the decision not to come back, but I'd also recognize some of those people who have made decisions to come in here in spite of ill health and be here to serve the country and to serve their colleagues. It's just been a real pleasure to have been here with them. I rise today to talk about our government's highest purpose. And what should that purpose be of any government? The protection of Canadians, ensuring our streets and communities in our country are safe for honest, law-abiding people as we live, work, and raise our families. At all times, our government has endeavored to ensure that our system of criminal justice reflects both this high purpose and the values and priorities of Canadians more broadly. For example, to give victims of crime a stronger voice, we introduced and passed our Victims' Bill of Rights. For too many years, the welfare of the criminal was held up as the highest priority of criminal justice. This historic legislation, the Victims' Bill of Rights, puts innocent victims back where they should have been all along, at the very heart of our system of justice. We've also changed laws regarding people deemed not criminally responsible for violent acts, ensuring that while dangerous offenders with mental illness receive the care they need, we also take care of the safety of the public. Reflecting Canadians' values also means that both the gravity of the offence and the need to protect Canadians must be considered in sentencing. That's why we got rid of the faint hope clause that allowed killers to apply for early parole. And that's why when a criminal kills more than one person, under our law, judges can now impose consecutive sentence and take every single lost life into account. That is why we have made it easier to deport foreign criminals from Canadian soil and made it more difficult for them to enter the country in the first place. That's why we've made it easier to remove dangerous foreign criminals from Canada's shores and to make it more difficult for them to even get here in the first place. And that's why we've toughened penalties, including creating mandatory prison sentences for many serious violent offences, in particular sex crimes against children. When we say all of these things, let's be clear. We desire the rehabilitation of all criminals. But certain criminals are too cruel, too dangerous to be released. Mr. Speaker, when somebody breaks the law and pays their debts to society, our hope is always for permanent rehabilitation. Nobody wants to see anybody degenerate in a lifetime of crime, but there are some criminals, the most dangerous, violent offenders, whose actions means that we cannot risk permitting them back on our streets. Yet, as the law stands, sometimes we do. Bill C-53 will end this practice. Specifically, criminals who prey on society's most vulnerable, plotting kidnapping or sexual assault that ends in murder. Criminals with such contempt for law and order that they kill correctional or police officers charged with our protection. Criminals who so despise our values, our way of life, that they carry out deadly attacks of terrorism and high treason. Criminals whose crimes are so horrific that they shock the conscience of the entire community. The freedom of these criminals would compromise the freedom of everyone around them. Mr. Speaker, the suffering of the victims of such horrific crimes and the suffering of those who love them is bad enough. But, Mr. Speaker, when the whole truth is known, they should find out that the crime could have been prevented in the first place, that this crime should have been prevented, but it wasn't, that the perpetrator was someone who should have been securely behind bars. When that is discovered, at that moment, their anguish, compounded by disbelief, becomes outrage. Not just to them, but to the entire community, to the entire country. And then we are all left to wonder what justice really means. And Canadians ask rightly why the most dangerous killers once in prison should ever be free again, only to threaten our children, our families, our friends, our neighbors, our fellow citizens. It is very hard to argue with that, and our government has no intention of arguing with that. This sort of thing must end in this country. Mr. Speaker, the fact is there are certain criminals who should never be allowed to walk the streets where you and your neighbors live and work, or in the streets where our children play.